A herd of elk in Wyoming has been following the same migration route for thousands of years. Then we built a road, and within 3 years, the route was gone, along with every memory of it. The elk did not fight the road, they did not die on it. Not in large numbers. Not at first. They did something quieter, and in the long run, far more consequential. They stopped. They turned around. They went back to where they came from and found a different way, a shorter, narrower, less nutritious corridor through terrain they had never used before. And in doing so, without any single animal understanding what it was doing, the herd erased something that had taken 10,000 years to build. This is what wildlife biologists in Wyoming have been watching happen for decades. Documented now in GPS collar data, covering hundreds of thousands of individual animal locations logged every 2 to 8 hours across seasons and years. The routes that elk, mule deer, pronghorn, and moose have used to move between their summer and winter ranges, routes refined by trial and error. Generations of animals are being cut, blocked, shortened, and abandoned, not disrupted, gone. And the part that changes everything about how you think about this problem. Migration is not instinct, it is knowledge. And when the route disappears, the knowledge disappears with it. The elk do not simply find a new path. They forget that there was a path at all. To understand what is being lost in Wyoming, you need to understand what an ungulate migration actually is. Not the postcard version of animals moving across a landscape, but the biological reality of what that movement represents. An elk herd's migration route is not encoded in its DNA. It is not a fixed program that runs automatically. Generation after generation, like a salmon returning to its natal stream by chemical signature, it is something much more fragile and much more extraordinary. It is learned behavior, passed from mother to calf, from experienced animals to naive ones. Across generations, the way a craft is passed from a master to an apprentice. The science establishing this was published in 2018 in a landmark study in the journal Science. Lead author Brett Chesimard and his colleagues at the University of Wyoming's Wyoming Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit GPS collared bighorn sheep and moose that had been translocated, moved into new habitats, then compared their movements to those of historical populations that had occupied their ranges for centuries. The difference was stark. Historical populations were strongly migratory, moving efficiently between seasonal ranges, tracking what biologists call the green wave, the flush of nutritious new plant growth that follows spring up in elevation, week by week, like a slow-moving banquet that the animals had learned to follow with extraordinary precision. Translocated populations in the same habitat, with the same landscape available to them, did not migrate. They stayed put. They did not know where to go, because nobody had taught them. Over multiple decades, those translocated populations gradually, incompletely, began to develop migratory behavior, learning from the landscape through trial and error, what their historical counterparts had refined over centuries of accumulated cultural knowledge. These results indicate that ungulates accumulate knowledge of their landscapes over time, and cultural transmission of this knowledge is necessary for migrations to arise and persist. Matthew Kaufman, one of Chesimard's doctoral advisors and the longtime director of the USGS Wyoming Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit at the University of Wyoming, translated the finding into its conservation implication with precise and devastating clarity. When migration corridors are lost, 100 years, that is the cost, measured in time, of one road built in the wrong place. Interstate 80 crosses Wyoming through a 100-mile-wide high desert gap between the northern and southern Rocky Mountains. It was built in the late 1960s and early 1970s. It is 56 years old. During the first winter after it opened, a severe cold snap descended on southern, the kind of winter that ungulates survive precisely because migration allows them to escape to low elevation range. The red desert pronghorn herd, which had migrated across that ground for millennia, could not get through. The highway and its fences had cut the corridor. Animals that should have moved south to survive the winter could not cross 4 lanes of traffic and the fencing on either side. That phenomena still happens today. In the severe winter of 2022-23, the same herd faced the same barrier. 56 years of human infrastructure, and the pronghorn are still paying the cost of a road that was built without anyone asking what was already using that ground. The Wyoming Migration Initiative, a research collaborative based at the University of Wyoming, has spent more than a decade affixing GPS collars to mule deer, elk, pronghorn, moose, bighorn, sheep, bison, and mountain goats across Wyoming and building what has become the most detailed atlas of ungulate migration in the world. The book they published in 2018, Wild Migrations, Atlas of Wyoming's Ungulates, represents millions of GPS location points, thousands of migration sequences, and the accumulated tracking data of hundreds of individual animals converted into population-level corridor maps that show, for the first time, exactly where Wyoming's herds move and exactly where they are being stopped. The maps are extraordinary. They are also alarming. Corridors that appear on those maps as bold, well-defined lines of consistent hayus represent routes that entire herds have followed for so long that the landscape itself has been shaped by their passage. Routes that appear fragmented, narrow, or truncated represent something else. The places where roads, fences, oil and gas development, and subdivision have cut across paths that animals had no evolutionary preparation to navigate. In the Pinedale Anticline, a natural gas development area in western Wyoming that expanded aggressively in the 2000s and 2010s, mule deer abundance dropped 60% between 2001 and 2009, even as the Bureau of Land Management implemented mitigation measures and reduced harvest. The cause, according to BLM's own reporting, was energy development disturbance. The roads, the well pads, the noise, the traffic, the light. They did not kill the deer directly. They made the landscape through which the deer needed to migrate so disrupted and alien that the animals moved faster, stopped foraging less often, and in the most extreme cases, abandoned segments of the route entirely. Wyoming Game and Fish. Biologists have documented individual herds that formerly used specific drainages for fall migration simply no longer using them after roads or energy infrastructure crossed those drainages. The animals do not go around the obstacle. They do not adapt immediately. They find a shorter, easier route that avoids the disturbance. And if that shorter route cannot sustain them through a hard winter, some of them die. When migration maps were overlaid on top of planned oil and gas leases in southern Wyoming, the overlay was clarifying in a way that years of individual environmental impact statements had not been. Officials at the Bureau of Land Management could suddenly see, with geographic specificity, which leases sat directly on the highest use segments of documented migration corridors. The result was the deferral of 22,000 acres of leases that might otherwise have been approved. They could look at those leases and say, these leases here, and here, are too risky to the continued migration of these deer through this mapped corridor. Some migrations, Kaufman has said publicly, have already been lost, probably forever. Here is the honest version of this story, because it is not a simple one. Wyoming has done more to understand and document ungulate migration than any other state in the American West, and arguably more than any other jurisdiction in the world. The Wyoming Migration Initiative's work has produced a body of science that has changed how wildlife managers think about corridors, stopovers, and the relationship between landscape quality and cultural knowledge in animal populations. The corridor maps have already been used to defer development, to site wildlife crossings, and to guide conservation easements on private land. The Trappers Point Wildlife Crossing near Pinedale, a combination of overpasses, underpasses, and game-proof fencing installed on U.S. Highway 191 reduced wildlife vehicle collisions by 90% and has been called a national model for how to mitigate migration conflicts. It has been documented by remote cameras, recording tens of thousands of successful crossings by mule deer, pronghorn, and elk. It works. The science worked. The engineering worked. The political will to build it existed. An Interstate 80 still cuts across southern Wyoming for 400 miles, with no purpose-built wildlife crossings, sustained only by a series of accidental underpasses, machinery passages, bridge clearances, not built for animals, but used by them anyway, because the animals have no other choice. Halleck Ridge documented nearly 1,500 mule deer crossings in a single 2-year period at one of these improvised spots, which means 300 to 400 individual deer are threading through a drainage structure under a major interstate as their best available option for reaching the range they need to survive. The tools exist. The will to deploy them at scale does not yet match the scale of the problem. Here is what the GPS data has revealed about how elk respond to roads, and why the 2015 construction timeline in Wyoming's most contested development zones matters specifically. When a new road is cut through migration terrain, the response is not immediate abandonment. The first year data typically shows animals testing the barrier, approaching, turning back, pacing the fence line, probing for gaps. Some animals cross successfully, some do not. The herd's behavior becomes more variable, more energetically expensive. As individual animals spend days or weeks navigating a disruption that their ancestors never encountered, by the second and third year after construction, the GPS data shows something different. The animals that could not cross reliably stop trying. They do not teach their calves to attempt the crossing, because they themselves have no successful crossing to model. The calves of mothers who avoided the road learn from their mothers to avoid the road. The corridor does not break all at once. It frays year by year, one mother-calf pair at a time, until what was a 3,000 animal migration bottleneck becomes a dead end. And the calves raised by mothers who never crossed do not know what lies on the other side. The summer range their herd used for centuries, the high meadows, the nutritious forbs, the cooler temperatures that reduce parasite load and let animals build body condition before winter, is not a memory they carry. It is a place that, for them, does not exist. This is what Kaufman means when he says the knowledge is lost. It is not abstract. It is a specific piece of geographic information: where to go in June, which drainage to follow, which ridgeline to cross, where the water is, where the forage peaks in which wheat. That lived in the social memory of a herd and was erased, not by a single catastrophic event, but by the quiet accumulation of animals that could not learn what their mothers no longer knew how to teach. More than 90% of Wyoming's ungulate populations are migratory. Nearly 1 million individual animals in the state depend on seasonal movement between winter and summer range to meet their nutritional needs, avoid deep snow, reduce predation pressure, and maintain the body condition that determines whether they survive hard winters and produce viable calves. Migration is not supplemental to their survival. It is the mechanism of their survival. The Wyoming Range Mule Deer Corridor runs 130 miles through the Salt River and Wyoming ranges, carrying a herd population of 34,500 animals through terrain that contains 1,531 existing oil and natural gas wells. The Red Desert to Hoback Mule Deer Corridor, at 160 miles, the longest documented mule deer migration in the world, carries 24,200 animals through a landscape that is a mosaic of national forests, BLM, and private land. The Jackson elk herd, numbering between 9,000 and 13,000 animals, migrates an average of 39 miles each way, with some individuals traveling as far as 168 miles. Every one of those numbers represents a population that learned its route across generations, and that cannot relearn it in a human lifetime if the route is severed. Somewhere in western Wyoming tonight, a cow elk is standing at a fence line she has tested before. Behind her are this year's calves. Ahead of her is a road that carries a level of traffic and noise that her species encountered. In evolutionary terms, approximately last Tuesday, she does not know the word for what the road is. She knows that the last time she tried to cross it, something large and fast went by, at a speed nothing in her evolutionary history prepared her to process. She knows that her mother never crossed it either. On the other side of that road is a high meadow that this herd's ancestors grazed every summer for thousands of years. The forage there peaks in late June, exactly the nutritional window that cow elk need to produce enough milk to build strong calves. The calves on the other side of that fence line have never seen it. They will not see it this year. If the road is still there when they are mothers, their calves will not see it either. That is what one road, in the wrong place, with no crossing structure, costs. Not immediately, not in the first year, but compounded across the generations of animals that inherit the knowledge, or the absence of knowledge of the animals before them. America has 4.1 million miles of roads. Wyoming has some of the last intact ungulate migrations in the lower 48 states. The scientists who have spent their careers, GPs scholaring and mapping and studying, those migrations are not asking for the roads to be removed. They are asking for crossings to be built where the corridors and the roads intersect, for development to be sited away from the highest dues migration segments, for the maps that now exist to actually be consulted before the next well pad or subdivision or highway expansion is approved. The tools exist, the knowledge exists, the maps exist. What is being decided right now in BLM offices and state planning departments and transportation budgets across Wyoming is whether that knowledge will be used before the routes are gone, or whether it will be used, as it has so often been used before, to document what was lost. If this story changed how you think about what a road costs, not in dollars, but in time, in knowledge, in 1,000 years of animal culture erased by 3 years of traffic. Share it, because the elk do not read the environmental impact statement, they just walk. And right now, in Wyoming, some of them are reaching a fence line at the edge of a road and turning back. And next year they will not try again. And the year after that, their calves will not know there was anything to try for. That is a problem we know how to solve. The question is whether we choose to solve it before the memory is gone. Tell us in the comments. Should federal law require wildlife crossing structures wherever a documented migration corridor crosses a major road? Subscribe, because the true stories are always more complicated than the headlines.